check. You got it? Okay. Hi everybody. Thank you very much for your patience until now. We're a bit late getting started. I think some people have already experienced Pristina traffic, so that's part of the experience of being here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jack Butcher. I'm the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Kosovo 2.0, the magazine based in Pristina here that's hosting this event today. And I just want to extend my own welcome to everybody. It's great to have so many top journalists and editors from around the region to collect here in Pristina today and tomorrow for this conference. Some of you, it's your first time here, so welcome in particular. There's a lot of people that are returning here. And actually, tonight's event is also open to the public, and so welcome to everybody who lives in Pristina who's just come along tonight for this. Just before we get started, a couple of really important bits of housekeeping. We do have a bar in the lobby at the back, so please help yourself to drinks. I know it's been a long day, it'll help the evening go along. Loosen you up to ask some questions later. So please, the bar's open throughout the whole evening this evening. The other thing is we have the hashtag, which many of you know is MediaNow2019. So if you're using Twitter, please do use the hashtag. And tonight's event's also being live streamed on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, you want to share the event, then please do share the live stream. Okay. Just before introducing our first speaker, I just want to say a note on the building that we're in tonight, Kino Armata. Because it's not a coincidence that we picked this place tonight for the event, for the talks. The cinema actually opened in 1975 as a public cinema, and it was within the building of belonging to the Yugoslav People's Army. The building was called Stipia Armatas, or Army House, and that's where the name Armata comes from. It was actually closed to the public in the 1980s, and it remained closed for around 30 years, and for much of that time it was behind big fences and barbed wire. After the war it was taken over by UNMIK initially, and then by ULEX, who eventually left the building in 1917, and at that point the government granted management of the space to the municipality, who turned to an independent organization, Foundation Armata, a non-profit organization, to run the space. And so they opened it up again as a public cinema. For the past 18 months, it's been restored. It's now a thriving cultural space in the center of Pristina. It's got a full program of art house films, music events, and other cultural events. So given the name of our conference, which is Shifting the Paradigm, I don't think there's a more fitting place in the city to hold tonight's talks. Okay, so in order to continue shifting the paradigm tonight, we've got three inspiring speakers, journalists and editors, and we've got about probably an hour and a half now because we've lost a bit of time, and they're going to get our Outloud Talks section underway. So let's move to the first speaker, and there's about 101 ways I think I could introduce John Sweeney. I did play with the idea of introducing him as a huge Brexit supporter and a Jeremy Corbyn fan. But he's left the BBC recently, and I know that he's not afraid to use colourful language, so I'm just going to go back to my original plan, I think. John's been operating at the very top of our field for 3 decades now, reporting on some of the biggest stories around the world. He started his career in local journalism, and he worked at The Observer in the UK for 12 years before joining the BBC in 2001. After almost 2 decades at the British public broadcaster, where he's worked as an investigative reporter for Panorama and Newsnight, 2 of the BBC's flagship programmes, he finally left the corporation last month. He's reported from more than 80 countries around the world, including the wars in Kosovo and other parts of Yugoslavia. And his reporting on the massacres of civilians in the village of Krušev Vogel actually led to him giving evidence in The Hague during the tribunal there, and that helped to convict 5 war criminals. He made a documentary on the massacre as well, which saw him winning an Emmy Award, and it's one of multiple awards that John's picked up for his work throughout his career. He's also one of the few foreign journalists to have reported from North Korea, where he controversially smuggled himself in with a group of students. And he was also smuggled into an interview in Zimbabwe in the boot of a car with the opposition leader while he was there reporting on mass graves under Robert Mugabe. In recent years, he's interviewed both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. And Trump even described him, and John, correct me if I get this slightly wrong, as lousy, thick, and disgusting. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. He's published multiple books on topics ranging from the invasion of Iraq to the Church of Scientology, and I think we might get a bit more on that later. And his most recent book, Murder on the Malta Express, Who Killed Daphne Caruana Galizia, was published last month. He's never afraid to speak his mind. He's never far from some controversy. So I can't wait to hear what he's got to say tonight. And so in all seriousness, John, it's a great honor to have you here in Pristina with us tonight. And please welcome John Sweeney.
Cheers. It's a great pleasure to be back in Pristina. The first time I came to this town, I rode on top of a British Army tank. It was the summer, it was 1999, and I wore shorts. And one of my colleagues said that his strange memory of this day was of seeing me in my shorts riding on a British Army tank like an enormous schoolboy. When we got to the Grand Hotel in Pristina, it was full of Milosevic supporters who were hiding from the KLA, and we were all trapped in the same hotel for the day, and the British were stuck at the airport because the Russians had got to the airport first. If you remember, General Sir Mike Jackson, who's become a friend of mine, said to the American commander Wesley Clark, the American told the British general to get rid of the Russians, and Mike Jackson said, "I'm not starting bloody World War III for you." So it's kind of wonderful to be back here, to be gassing on about journalism. And journalism now is in trouble. It's in trouble because Trump's in the White House. It's in trouble because Putin and his proxies are doing strange and frankly frightening things to undermine and hollow out our democracies, while the net giants and social media is somehow empowering the far right and the right and the left to a toxification of our political discourse. And the most important thing is for us to stick to our guns and keep calm. I really mean this. The most important thing for a journalist these days is to maintain your calm. Please play the clip. Oops. Sorry, it's...
Jim,
okay.
what evidence, Sean Lonsdale, do you have that people have been tortured? Oh, Tom, you didn't do that.
Hold a second, Tommy. No, stop there, Tommy.
No, I'm not stopping here. You listen to me for a second. You're accusing members of my religion of engaging in brainwashing.
No, Tommy, you stop! No, listen to me! You were not there at the beginning of that interview! You were not there! You did not hear or record all of the interview! Do you understand?
Brainwashing is a crime against humanity.
You are quoting the second half of the interview! Not the first half! You cannot assert what you're saying! Now, listen to me. What I meant to say was keep calm unless you're talking to a member of a crazy space alien cult. Now, if Tom Cruise ever comes to Pristina, you know what to ask him. But now if I'm about to tell you something, and if I tell it to you, you may all die. I'm planning to tell you the secret that may cost you $1 million or 30 years of your life if you become a Scientologist. Do you want to hear the secret? Yes. Hey, come on, let's hear that louder. Yes. Right, you're journalists, huh? Yeah. So you may die. You're happy? Okay. So 75 million years ago, an evil space alien Satan warlord called Lord Zenu brought space aliens to Earth and blew them up with hydrogen bombs inside volcanoes. And the spiritual remains of these pesky space aliens, called Theta, stuck to humanity and are the sole cause of war and madness and all of our sorrow, including disease. Now that, in my view, is total bollocks. And I have been going around telling that story for the last 11, 12 years since I made that film in 2007. And for me to tell you that story, it's such a powerful story inside Scientology that I will die if I tell it. Ha ha ha. So I am living proof that Scientology is a load of bollocks. Also, this is a simple thing that you've got to do as a journalist. Every now and then, while retaining your objectivity, your sense of professionalism, your fairness to the other side, whoever you're writing about, whoever you're reporting on, you can also make a judgment call, and sometimes it's right to say that this Scientology is a cult. It's a crazy cult. And even though men of power and money, people like Tom Cruise and John Travolta and the church threatened me with they threatened us we had masses and masses of legal letters from a law firm in London. It's called Carter Fuck. Sorry, I got that wrong. It's called Carter Ruck. And I am currently wallpapering my upstairs loo with threatening letters from Carter Ruck on behalf of the Church of Scientology and others, and we'll get onto that too. But the public got it. I'm sorry I lost my temper. That was foolish and silly. But nevertheless, every now and then, people understand what happens. People understand the pressure we were under. There's a film called Scientology and Me, and you can see all the rest of it. And I wrote a book, which is on Amazon, called The Church of Fear. But Scientology was fascinating because it's a closed cult inside the world's richest and most open society, the United States. And trying to understand how Scientology works helped me a little bit understand what's going through the minds of people in Islamic State and people inside the entire political religion that is North Korea, and also people, for example, on the far right, like in Britain, Tommy Robinson and his supporters. They almost get to a point whether they can cut off themselves from normal society, often and in particular their friends and loved ones and their mums and dads. And they become, they see some pure message. So some of this, at least, is altruism gone wrong. But I find it fascinating to understand and study this. And there was a fantastic American military psychiatrist who treated American GIs who'd been brainwashed by the Chinese communists during the Korean War, back between 50 and 53. And these people came out of the North Korean prison camps as if they were automatons, just repeating Maoist phrases. And that's hopefully not my phone. And so what you've got was these people were locked inside this cult. And the enemy of cults, the enemy of the totalitarian mind, is a sense of humor and a tolerance for mockery. Now, last night, with some rather dodgy colleagues from the Balkans, they're at the back there, they know who they are, we went and had a little pool party. It was freezing cold. We bought some tins of beer glamorously from the local petrol station. And as a sort of sad group of journalists, we walked past the 20th anniversary of the Bank of Kosovo. And you could see inside, and there were sort of glamorous women and money and all of that. And there were people with Mercedes limousines with the engines running. And the pathetic journalists are wandering past with their tins of beer to sit outside. But we had so much more fun. And our conversation was so much more interesting. So there is a weird thing about being a journalist. The money's rubbish, you're under threat. And at the same time, some of the conversations you can have, some of the conversations I'm sure you've had here, are absolutely fascinating because our job is to tell truth to power. Now, some of the time, it's very difficult. In this part of the world, it's very, very difficult. And you heard from Jack that I did 2 films from Little Crucia, and I thought we banged up 7 war criminals, not 5, but then I'm not good at detail. I am. I'm joking. There was a precious and strange moment. Now, I completely understand that if you're a Kosovar journalist, it's very difficult for you to do a story about how the Serbs are actually being hard done by, given the history here, or if you're a Serbian journalist doing it the other way round. Nevertheless, that's at the heart of journalism, doing the difficult stories. So what happened in 99 was Milosevic started his campaign of mass murder against the Kosovars, and people in the village of Kruša Ivogel, in Albanian, in Serb, Kruša Mala, the Serbs with their guns, the militia, they turned on their neighbors, and they machine gunned 110, 112 men and boys in a barn. 6 men survived. One of them had burnt hands. The Serbs set the barn on fire, and this man had burnt hands, and he managed to get out. And the villagers, we met some of the villagers in some of the refugee camps in Albania, and they talked about the man with burned hands. He was an eyewitness. And we went round every refugee camp or facility or gym in the whole of Albania in a massive chaos in the spring of 99, looking for the man with burned hands. And eventually we found him. And he told the story, and he ended up in The Hague giving evidence against the war criminals. And when in 99 in June, I was able to go from Pristina to Prizren with my friend James Miller, a brilliant, brilliant cameraman. We went into the Serb houses. These are the people we'd heard had killed their neighbors. And in one of these houses was a list. It was a list, a duty roster of all of the Serb militiamen, the people who'd been identified as killing their Kosovar neighbors. And this list related to a pay list in Belgrade, and this was the evidence which was heard at The Hague to nail these 5 Serb police generals who had overseen this whole operation. And we were there in that village for long enough to see what happened next. The KLA, the Učica, came down, and they burnt down the home. They were empty, the Serbs had gone, but they burnt down the Serb homes in the village. An act of revenge. I can understand the human motivation for that because of what I saw and what I'd heard. Nevertheless, they did that, and we reported it. So when I was at The Hague, I was accused by the defense for the people who were subsequently convicted of war criminal of being too pro-Albanian, too pro-Kosovar, of being partisan, of being biased. And I was able to say, that's not fair, because we showed the Albanians burning down the Serb houses, the Kosovars burning down the Serb houses as well, and that meant balance and fairness. So remember that. Now, Trump. He calls me lousy and disgusting. President Donald Trump, you are far lousier than I will ever be. I also am no fan of Vladimir Putin. The last time I went to Moscow, I ended up in a Moscow police station for being questioned about the desecration of a shrine to Boris Nemtsov, a man I like so much I dedicated a novel to. Boris Nemtsov was fantastically funny. And what's frightening today, Trump in the White House, this poison about fake news, CNN, BBC, whatever, New York Times, the Washington Post, fake news, fake news, fake news. We are not fake news. And what Trump is doing is poisoning the environment. When Khashoggi was murdered and suffocated and then chopped up with a bone saw on, it seems, says the CIA, the express orders of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He's known, by the way, in Saudi Arabia by his initials, MBS. They stand for Mohammed bin Salman. They also stand for Mr. Bonesaw. I can remember when I understood what had happened there, I felt genuinely afraid. I also felt genuinely afraid and horrified when Malta's bravest journalist, Daphne Caruana Galizia, got blown up. And I went over to Malta. I did a piece for Newsnight. It's on YouTube, Malta's Shame. And I interviewed a Maltese journalist who was taking over from Daphne's work, and he was incredibly brave, is incredibly brave. And essentially, Manuel Delia and I and Carlo Benini, a brilliant Italian journalist from La Repubblica, we wrote this book which came out last month. And in the back of the book, page 361, there's a series of really irritating questions to the lawyers that we wrote of a man called Jorgen Fenech. He's Mr. Casino, and he's the man behind a €1 billion new power station which was being developed there. By the way, we're going to have a question and answer session in a second, and whoever asks the most irritating question gets a free copy of this book. And I'm just going to read some of just one question that we put to them. We went back to lawyers, Briffa and Vella, and asked them to comment on Alfred de Giorgio. Alfred de Giorgio is one of the men who has been accused of murdering Daphne with a car bomb. There's a lot of mobile phone evidence pinning him to the crime. We asked them if it seemed odd that Alfred de Giorgio could walk away from the Porto Masso casino, which Jorgen Fenech owned, with €440,000 over a period of time, whether his gambling was flagged as suspicious, whether they checked the provenance of the money that was gambled, and whether Jorgen Fenech thought this was a cloak payment for services Alfred de Giorgio carried out for a third party, which Jorgen Fenech was aware of the transaction. And they replied, blah, 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 blah. And then we wrote back again. To be absolutely sure, we asked the lawyers to categorically state whether Alfred de Giorgio had gambled in Jorgen Fenech's casino after 2013. This was their response. Dear Mr. Delia, please refer to our earlier email of today, which is very clear on this matter. It isn't. This morning, Jorgen Fenech got in his motor yacht at 5 o'clock, and he sped off from his casino somewhere and was caught by the Maltese Navy or the Maltese police boats and is now in handcuffs, and he's been charged in the connection of Daphne Caruana Galizia. Journalism matters. Journalism works. Do it. Thank you. Ooh.
Thank you very much, John. That was a fantastic speech to get us started with this evening. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions initially to John, and then we're going to open up the floor. So if anyone has questions that they want to ask as well, then we've got 10 or 15 minutes in which we can have a bit of a conversation. You mentioned some elements about Trump and Brexit and people lying in your talk. And in this region as well, it's not necessarily such a new phenomenon that people in power will just tell barefaced lies. And I think the media has a a challenge in that respect on how to report it. And I was going to ask you, does the media or certain types of media have a duty to explicitly call out lies? But you kind of answered that question when you said you can make a judgment call, and you can, if you see a cult, you can call out a cult. So instead, at what stage are you able to make that judgment call? How well do you, is it something you can make immediately? Is there something that people need to have been investigating, something like you were with the Church of Scientology for a long time?
Yeah, good question. I worked for the BBC for 17 years, and the reason why and it feels a bit like a cult, to be honest, which I've now left. But also another thing, which was when I was inside the BBC, it was there was an intense amount of arguments where you said, where people, editors and bosses and colleagues would say, no, John, you can't say that. And I was like a kind of monster inside a cage. And I'm worried now that I'm out of my cage, whether I'll just run around like a monster and lose some credibility, because I can say immediately what I think. And weighing evidence is vitally important to what we do and how we do it. So, to be fair to me, that clip happened after we were pursued, and our interviewees who were critics of the Church of Scientology were pursued. People came to our hotel room in the middle of the night. Hotel in the middle of the night. There were creepy private eyes. There was a car chase in LA. And there was a lot of evidence that by the time I lost it, I was wrong to lose it, but anyway. So it's a cult. You go to North Korea and you see this weird creepiness, and then you go to the south and you talk to defectors and you get it. So Brexit's harder because it's a cultural revolution or a cultural rebellion against kind of, I would say, the modern world. I think it is a dark fairy story that people have been told. But 17.5 million people voted for that. Some of them my good friends, and I understand at least some people's anxieties. So, for example, immigration, and in particular immigration. You know, I covered the Bataclan and all the terror attacks in Britain in 2017, and they were grim and frightening. And immigration is not visited equally on rich and poor alike. Immigrants go to the poor areas, so we're asking the poor whites to be the least xenophobic while having the most pressure on their communities. So that's something we like in Britain, we've got to think hard about, that there were genuine concerns and all of them. But Brexit, two Englishmen boring on about Brexit, that's not what I hear. But in a funny way it is, because there's almost a civil war happening in Britain. And this is the thing that frightens me, having been to Yugoslavia in '91. When I first came to Yugoslavia in '91, a British tourist told me off on the plane for bigging up the tension. I wanted to bring him back to Sarajevo and say, hey, I was right, but he'd gone then. So I'm frightened of the power and energy that populism has got around the world. Trump, Johnson, Salvini in Italy, you know the people here better than I do. And it's scary, but what we do is still good. It's not well paid, and it's hard and dispiriting, but it's still precious and worth doing.
I'm just going to follow up on Brexit.
Yeah.
But it's linked to a broader point that I want to make. And so you mentioned there with Brexit, one of the issues, or you hinted at the fact that maybe people in the media weren't understanding the issues of that people were feeling, or that they weren't relating so much to the people. Would that be fair to say? And you also mentioned in your talk earlier that we as journalists need to hold our nerve and not to panic. Do you think that actually we do need to think about changing in order to being more in touch with the communities that we're working with? And we had a talk earlier in one of the workshops about actually how do we engage more in a dynamic community sense in today's journalism. So do you think that there are actually changes that the media needs to be making in order to better represent or to better include the voices of more people?
It's a difficult question. I don't think... I went to Iran in '91. Saddam was murdering the Kurds, and 1 million Kurds ran from Saddam towards Iran. And I found we got close to the border with Iran, which is where all the rest of the journalists, about 60 of us, wanted to get to. I found a refugee who spoke English from Iraq, and I kept 60 journalists waiting half an hour while I talked to this guy without quite realizing, because it was a good story. And an old guy called Jonathan Randall got off his coach, came onto my coach and said, "Listen, kid, I've been doing this business since the Congo and you are a naughty boy." So I became great friends, and there's a picture of Jonathan and I in Bosnia somewhere where we've heard awful news. I don't think journalism has changed very much since the days when people like us were worrying about the rise of a man with a small moustache called Adolf Hitler in Germany. I don't think it's changed very much. I think, for example, the British example with Brexit, that most journalists didn't get it. Weirdly, I was flown over to talk about Scientology to American A&E, Arts and Entertainment Network, and the crew in California were switched on and they were nervous, and I predicted that Trump would win. But most of the time, most British journalists, certainly the BBC, didn't get Brexit the result, didn't get Trump the result. And that's a flaw. And there's a danger, certainly with Twitter, which is good fun much of the time, that we end up talking to each other too much and not enough to the wider community. Because why is populism so successful? There's a serious problem there, and it feels like under threat, and under economic threat in particular, people return to grandma. I'm using grandma as a metaphor rather than as a fact. But they're going backwards in their imagination to a previous version of reality, which isn't true in my mind at all, but nevertheless, this is powerful magic. And what we've got to do as journalists is to work harder to understand this, because what comes with it, some of it at least, is dark and scary. I'm worried about the future. I feel more under threat as a journalist today than I ever have. In '91, in places like Vukovar, it was heavy. But now in London, I feel some threat, and in the States, you can feel threat too as well. So there's a new distemper across the democratic world. China and Putin, Xi in China and Putin in Russia, they feel strong. So we've got to keep on doing what we do, and we've got to think harder about why people vote for Trump, Salvini, Brexit, Boris Johnson, etc.
Just continuing this note on threats and feeling like it's a darker place that you mentioned there, and obviously we know about Daphne's murder in Malta and other journalists being killed in Turkey, in Slovakia, in Bulgaria in recent years. Do you think that our democracies are becoming actually tougher and more dangerous places, or do you think that journalists are becoming more of a threat because they're increasing their skills and their methods to actually uncover some of the things that go on?
No, I think Europe is becoming a more dangerous place. I think that a combination of globalization, fear of perhaps an exaggerated fear of Islamic State, and immigration, the like of which a lot of Europe has never experienced before, is turning our societies inward And a lot of the kind of liberal shibboleths that people like me took for granted are crumbling to dust. I miss the Berlin Wall, but I covered the Czech Revolution, and I went to Romania on December the 23rd. I got into Timișoara, and on Christmas Eve 1989, I drove across the revolution to Bucharest. It was fantastic. Now, the idea that Romania is not as dreadful, but what's happening now in Hungary and in Poland, Czechia, as it's called these days, I call it Czechia, what's happening there is scary and frightening. So it feels that democracy and Europe's getting darker, and it worries me.
Okay, maybe on that note, we can open the floor up to questions. So has somebody got a mic? Thanks. Just in the middle here.
Remember, the most irritating question wins a book.
I'm not quite sure it's going to be irritating, but we'll see. I come from Belgrade, but originally I'm from Croatia. One of the refugees. One of the refugees during the 90s. The whole process is being called like Balkanization. We can even find it in the dictionaries, like the process of falling apart. So usually when we speak here about the Balkans or each of countries, we often speak like we are something important. We like to give ourselves credits for something that we don't even deserve. But in one way, when we speak about this Balkanization, maybe we can even say that this Western Balkan and the Balkans were some kind of avant-garde when we speak about what is happening in Europe and in the world right now. So do you think that this was the avant-garde process that was happening here in the Balkans? And do you expect that something like that will happen in Europe and the rest of the world? And can you see anything good, any good movement or good avant-garde process in the Balkans that is happening right now that could maybe tomorrow also spread across the Europe? Thank you.
Kvala, Bog. So, when I came here, I came to a land which was torn apart by a horrible and brutal civil war where the Milosevic Serbs were murdering people, and there were whole-scale massacres, and that has stopped. So instantly it's good. When the Syrian refugees, I followed them, went through Serbia, I do not like the current government in Serbia one little bit. I'm not a huge fan of much of the government in Croatia either. I understand what's happening in Bosnia, that's sad. And Albania is Albania. But there is not big murder happening. So there is a massive improvement of what it was like from 91 to 20 years ago. You were afraid to be a journalist because you got shot. I think in 91, 45 journalists were killed, 50, something like this. It was heavy, partly because we were completely inexperienced. Balkanization is a tragedy because, listen, I'm Yugo-nostalgic. I'm not Yugo-nostalgic for 45. I think what Tito and his people did was horrible and cruel when they got power. But over time, as the dictatorship became more and more elderly and more corrupt, but also more human, and allowed some degree of local autonomy, then Yugoslavia became, as you all know this, for a time the best place to live in the whole of Eastern Europe. And then this awful, stupid war. For me, what happened in Yugoslavia is a warning. It's a warning against falling out. Now, there are many, many problems with Yugoslavia, and eventually, I understand, I know, because I reported it, Milosevic wrecked it. Tudjman helped, Begovic tried to stop it but didn't have enough power. I am frightened about the geopolitical consequences of Brexit, because Angela Merkel is, I think, Europe's finest statesman, woman, obviously, but she will go one day, and who do we get next? And I think Britain, this may be silly, but Britain's been some kind of countervailing power against German supremacy in Europe, or German power. That's true. And with us out of it, I worry that and for me, what happened in Yugoslavia is a warning. At the same time, we shouldn't be super pessimistic. Somebody said, I think Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And our times now, it feels like a rhyming from the 1930s, but none of the people we're dealing with are really truly like Hitler. And so for the moment, it's holding together. For the moment, it's going to be okay. So one should worry and see what happened here and hope and pray it doesn't happen across Europe. And getting the balance right. I mean, you know, our systems are good, but us, journalism, it's a massive, massive defender for democracy and the rule of law and calling power to account. So we're more necessary than ever before. Good.
Right here.
Great, thanks.
Hi, I'm Alexander Brezer. I'm a journalist with Bearden, and I have a podcast called Sarajevo Calling. I hope I don't have an irritating question. Maybe I can irritate you by saying that I'm a Liverpool fan.
I saw the last game where they won.
Oh, okay.
The last season, and Mo Farah's daughter kicked the ball across the line, and the Liverpool cop cheered as loud for Mo Farah's,
Mo Salah.
Oh yeah, I'm actually Tranmere Rovers, not Liverpool, but I was at the game. Anyway, never mind.
I fear we were getting a bit distracted.
That was not the question.
But by the way, attacks on Muslims are 20% down in Liverpool than they are across the north of England because of him.
And they're calling it the Mohammed Salah effect.
Yeah. And so hey.
So there's something to it.
So not irritating. You won't win the book.
Okay. I had to try, right? My question is more along the lines. I was going to ask you what keeps you awake at night, but you already said plenty on that topic. So I'm going to narrow it down and ask you, what keeps you awake at night when it comes to journalism specifically? Like, do you think that we're going to lose all of our legitimacy eventually, given all the disinformation and fake news, etc.? And not only that, when you combine it with the attacks and everything that you've talked about already, do you think it's kind of like a long game over for us, or is there still a fighting chance?
Now that's irritating. I revisit my decision. I did a film about Tommy Robinson for the BBC. The BBC didn't put it out, partly because I'd been tricked and I behaved foolishly, fool Sweeney, fool. But I found it very hard on the BBC. I felt didn't have my back. No, they may have a completely different view about that. But it's difficult when your own side don't back you. And that's a real problem. Partly I say this as a kind of frontline soldier, and there's always an issue there. But to the question, what made you lose sleep at night, is that. Now I'm my own boss now, so the thing that worries me is that I speak too freely, and that I'm not considered, or I don't have people around me to say, John, you can't say that, you can't write that, or calm it down a little bit or whatever. And that's, so the responsibility of minding my tongue and weighing it is more pressing on my mind now than before. But generally, I'm an old man and I drink too much and I have to go to the toilet, is the correct answer.
Can I get another one in?
Yeah.
Like a really quick one. How do we keep...
Sorry, that came out wrong.
No, that's all right. How do we keep calm? Like, how do we keep sane, I think is a better question. How do we keep our psychological...
We do, I mean, like today, I mean, Daphne was murdered brutally and horribly, But today felt like a great day, and that the evidence, the three men accused of her killing deny it. We'll see what Mr. Jorgen Fenech says. And the nature of the charges against him aren't there. Innocent, you are innocent until proven guilty. That's what we believe in. But we stick to our guns. This is good, hanging out, thanks to the Dutch embassy or whatever that's paying for this. This is good because it allows us to talk to each other. Always more interesting what happens in the lift and in the bars than in these sessions. But you get a sense I've met people here from all over who are good fun, and you know that they're continuing what we do, what the guy Jonathan Randall said. Hey, I've been doing this business since the Congo, so we pass it on. And we carry on. I mean, like, it was worse for people like us in the 30s than it is now. But certainly, life as a journalist, it feels to me, was better in the 80s and 90s and noughties than it is now. I think that's true. There was more money, and all of that. But we should both, I mean, it's unrealistic. I am afraid, and I'm being honest when I say I am more afraid to do my job than before. That's true. At the same time, what we do is good, and we should carry on doing it.
I think there's a question at the back on the left-hand side near the centre.
There's also a woman as well, which in my woke ways. There's a lady in a blue scarf as well.
We'll move around there.
Yeah.
I don't actually have my glasses on, so I can't see who I'm pointing at. I'm just seeing hands waving.
Sorry, sort of vanity means that you can't... There's nothing wrong with wearing glasses.
Can't see a thing.
Yeah, okay, good. I can't see.
All right.
My
name is Ardit Kika, and I have a question for you. Do you think using words like Balkanization could be irritating for Balkan people?
Yes,
especially,
and I didn't use...
I mean, sorry, for Balkan people in this room.
Yes, but I didn't use it. It was put to me, and then I addressed it. But I actually, I mean, I used to hang around here a lot, and I love this part of the world. And I kind of like, in Bosnia, you could kind of work out where the Austro-Hungarian Empire stopped, because the coffee changed from cappuccino to really espresso stuff and all of that kind of stuff. Now, am I an expert? No. Am I some cultural imperialist? No either, I would say. If my secondary use of the term Balkanization offended you, I'm sorry.
All right, just one more question. You said you understand your friends in Britain who are angry at, not angry, I don't know what expression you used, are angry at migrants. You said they have a lot of pressure. Like British men have a lot of pressure, and that's why you understand their attitudes toward migrants. Could you elaborate on that?
What I said was the poor. So the problem is that the consequence, like, immigration is not visited equally on rich and poor alike. So that if you go to... So, for example, David Cameron had a constituency in Witney, which is a beautiful part of Oxfordshire. There are hardly any immigrants there. And then you go to the northern towns where business, there isn't much money, and the government has deliberately put refugees and asylum seekers in these places because it's much cheaper. The consequence, if you're poor working class, is that they say that their communities are put under pressure, for example, for schools, so that if your kid's got learning difficulty, but you've got 2 or 3 Somali families come in who don't speak English as their first language, then instantly the newcomers will get those services. Now, I am not in favour of demonising immigrants. I am trying to understand why what many people say is true is that so many people voted for Brexit because they were angry about immigration. Why were they angry about immigration? What's driving that anger? Part of the difficulty of understanding that anxiety was that at least some of it was wrapped up in language we would all characterise as racist and prejudiced. But nevertheless, there was a real grievance there, I feel, which was in some way masked by this. And so for too long, and this is absolutely true of New Labour, that they didn't listen hard enough. At the same time, we mustn't lose our humanity and our decency. And it feels increasingly difficult to keep that, to keep the two things in balance. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thanks. I'm just conscious of the time. I think we've got time for probably 2 or maybe 3 quick questions. So we've got one at the back.
There's a lady with the blue scarf, which your glasses.
We'll come.
So, yeah.
We've got one at the back on the right-hand side. Then there's a woman in the middle here, and then we can go to the lady with the blue scarf.
Right. My name is Joanna. I'm reporting from Belgrade. Some time ago, I think it was last year, photojournalist Paul Conroy gave an interview for Kosovo 2.0, and he made a point that really got me thinking. He was saying that journalists are not just observers anymore, and that if the world is going the way it's going, then we can't just sit and observe and report on what we see. So I was wondering, what do you think about that kind of engagement?
I agree with it. Paul is Paul was the photographer with my colleague from the Sunday Times, Marie Colvin, when she was murdered by the Syrian regime. And Paul is a great, great hero. And I feel that we should engage with our humanity while at the same time remembering that we should be fair and honest. So we've got to do both things. We've got to both engage. We're not robots. I am fully aware that I'm subjective about virtually everything. At the same time, I also feel that, so for example, my example when I talked about the Milosevic Serbs burning down the Kosovar houses, that was an example of fairness, because part of you didn't want to put that in because it was evidence of the victims behaving badly, but it happened and it was fair. By the way, you notice I keep on saying Milosevic Serbs. It's an old habit and I haven't lost it, which is because I'm fully aware that there were Serbs, fantastic people who were in Belgrade, the Serbian Red Cross, who did fantastic work and told me stories I could print that they couldn't print. I've never forgotten the courage of the people who opposed Milosevic from 91 onwards inside Belgrade, inside Serbia. So we've got to commit and we've got to stand by. We've got to believe in it, but we've got to be human beings, and at the same time we've got to do our job properly. And that also means being fair to the and trying to, quote the other side. If the other side won't be quoted, at least try and think why they're thinking what they're thinking, because that's our job. It's not easy, but that's what we should try and do.
Okay, thanks. I think we've got the next question in the middle.
Përshëndetje, jam shqipe miftari nga Drenica, diplomum gazetari, momentalisht e papunë.
Sorry, just one second.
Okay. Jam shqipe miftari nga Drenica, e diplomuar në gazetari, momentalisht e papunë, po se e papunë, po e përcjelli median edhe po shoh që ka në gazetarinë në Kosovë ka.
Sorry, just one second.
Okay, well, tell me what she said.
She's cheaper. She is from Drenica. She's
Yeah.
currently unemployed, but she has journalism.
Yeah.
That's what she said.
Okay, fine. What's your question?
Pyetja ime është, në fakt doja një koment, pastaj pyetjen dhe mendimin tonë, për shkak se me që jam e pa punë, kom pas kohë mjaft me rrit fëmin edhe me përcjell gazetarin. Për mendimin tim gazetaria në Kosovë ka hec shumë, po ka disa mangësi kur është në pyetjet e...
Can you just translate it?
Better. Technology.
For everyone.
No, just, yeah, actually better for everybody because...
Since she's unemployed,
Well,
she
now I
has
have to,
time to raise the children and follow journalism.
Anyway, what's the question?
Dua ta di mendimin tonë si e sheh gazetarin tani në vitin 2019. Në Kosovë është fjala. Nëse gjithmonë e keni përcjell, keni pas mundësi, kuptohet se...
So just for everybody, the question is about asking how John perceives journalism in Kosovo if...
Sure thing. I have a suggestion, which is, why don't we take all the rest of the questions, and then I can run an answer all together.
So if we go here next with the next question. And then after that, we're going to go down into the fourth, fifth row here afterwards. So first question here with the blue scarf. Yeah. And the next question will be down here.
Hi,
Thanks.
my name is Josie Mintel. Thank you for advocating for my question. You might regret it, though. I have two candidates for an irritating question. The first of which is, what do you regret the most, if anything, that you've published in your career? And the second of which is, how do you feel about the Oxford comma?
About what?
The Oxford comma.
The Oxford comma.
The Oxford comma?
Yeah.
What is the Oxford comma?
When you list something, 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 and something, do you put a comma before the and or not?
Ah, right, yes. Okay, yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Okay, next,
Let's go to get one more question here in the fourth row. And then John will answer them as a group.
Hi. I just wanted to ask a similar question, but not what you regretted, but if you are ashamed of something, what you did as a journalist. And the second, if there is something, and what is the worst thing you are ashamed of? And the second question, why did you leave the cult?
Why did I leave the...
I don't think John was in the cult, he was reporting on the cult.
No, he was in the BBC cult.
It's getting more irritating. Right, those three questions?
Yeah.
Yes. So, I haven't been here long enough, but I can tell from the feeling in this room that actually journalism in Kosovo is well, hey, it's way better than it was when I was last here 20 years ago. I think it needs, my guess is it would need to ask more questions of people in power here and the relationship with organised crime and all of that. But it doesn't feel as it's dire, so that's good. You're bloody irritating. The Oxford comma, I don't even know what it is, but now you've told me. My view is that you go, I like jam, comma, marmalade, and I'm trying to think of another, and preservatives. And I would just put one comma in that. Does that answer your question? And then both of you, I mean, have you studied to become Catholic priests or something? This isn't a confession. I left the thing. In the miners' strike in 1983, 84, I was a local reporter on the Sheffield Telegraph, and there was a miner who's been beaten up by the London police in Yorkshire, and he had his hands cuffed behind his back in a police car, and they were beating him up. And I was walking along on my own. I didn't have a cameraman with me, a photographer. It was late at night. And I felt I should have stopped it, but had I stopped it, I would have been arrested. And I had enough The thing is, as you get older, you become wiser, and also because you're older, you've got a beard. In my case, it's harder for the police to rough you up. At that time, when I was very young, I could have, it was kind of obvious, but I didn't intervene, and I feel guilty about that. But I can't place my hand on a piece that I've written that thought, no, shame on you. I've got stick for stuff that happened in North Korea. I think it was unfair, and I can bore you about that, but I felt we helped tell a bit of truth about that horrible tyranny. And I think there's 100,000 people in kind of effectively concentration camps in North Korea who, were they able to see what we were doing, would have been fully on our side. So I'm not going to apologize that. And now that I've left the BBC, I can actually say, thinking about it, I can actually say I was pleased I shouted at the Church of Scientology, screw the fuckers.
Okay.
Oh, this is live. Get me out of here quickly.
I think, on that note, then maybe that's a good point to draw it to a close, not because John started swearing, but because we do have two other speakers that we need to get on, and time's moving along. Who's won the book, John?
The lady in the blue scarf.
Great. Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, guys. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jack. While our colleagues here try to change a little bit the setup and invite our next speaker to arrange a sound and so on, Mariah, I will ask you to join me, and so the guys here can help you with the mics. So, hello everyone, my name is Cristina Marie, and for those who I didn't have the chance to meet today, I'm the multimedia content editor at Kosovo 2.0. But I joined the team 7 years ago as an intern, and then as a journalist, and then as a program manager. If you run into me in the street, I'll just say I'm a journalist in essence and at core. We've spoken a lot about a lot of issues that are of great importance. Of course, Brexit was one of them, as it couldn't be otherwise. But our next speaker, Mariah Martens, is coming from a media collective, Are We Europe, which is trying to also find out and explore what does it mean, what kind of discussions, what narratives do we encounter when we get out of Brexit, when we get out of Brussels, when we get out of these confines. This media collective was established to answer and to explore the idea of the European identity, and at the same time, what does it mean as well to be a journalist in this kind of space? I will not take a lot of time to introduce Mariah. I will let her to go on directly with her presentation. We will have 10 or 15 minutes listening to her and the work that she's doing with Are We Europe. And then we will also have time for questions from you and with me as well. So Mariah, thank you for being here, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. And thanks for pronouncing my name so great. That's wonderful. What an act to follow. So yeah, my name is Mariah Martens. I'm from Are We Europe, and I'm here to talk to you about shifting narratives. And I first want to plant a little thought into your mind. When you open a newspaper, which maybe might not happen that often anymore, but when you do, what do you see? You see the domestic news section, sports, opinion, and then you see foreign news. Did you ever think what the foreign in foreign news is? Did you ever thought to yourself, who are those foreigners? What is the foreign that we talk about? Probably not, because foreign sounds like a very understandable, logical term. We all understand foreign is that what is other to us. But Michael Billig says, a student of nationalism, he says this is what we call banal nationalism. It is the moment when we assert once more who is us and who is them. So who is in the foreign section and who is not. Coming from a European media collective, when we talk about Europe, that us and them gets placed in the them a lot. So the European narrative is built within those frames. And why is it important to look at this? It's not just because we want to talk about an us and them discussion, but for me also to make you understand that identity building and the narratives that we want to then shift, that we want to talk about, are not just about the words that we write, are not just about the stories that we choose, but also about the structures in which we make them. So in which sections are we writing? By who are we making, who are we making those stories with? So narrative structure our identities, and the structures structure our narratives. When it comes to the European narrative, I think we can say it's been hijacked by national media. And that is because national media are our most logical choice to go to for European news. But as I said, because it's always in the foreign section, we're talking about a narrative that's being constructed as foreign. But if you look at Europe today, a European identity is growing. I think when I look at my generation, I can call ourselves the Erasmus generation. We have traveled far and wide and met loads of wonderful people and have started friendships, relationships maybe even. We've started to work in different countries. I myself have lived in 5 European countries by now and have called all of those home at some point in my life. So a European identity suits me. There is something like a European identity, but at least to me, that there's not such a thing as a European narrative, because that narrative is being published only by The Guardian, Le Monde, Die Zeit. Actually, not just about national news, but actually mostly about the national news in the West. They, with their big media powerhouses, have most control over the European narrative. And then what are we talking about? We're talking about Brexit, of course, all the time. We talk about Brussels and the policies that happen there. And anything that is breaking news, obviously, because that's what good reporting is. But in any other newspaper, all the other sections are filled with other stories that are not breaking news, but are still very valuable, and journalism that we really need to develop. And when we talk about the European narrative, that is not necessarily there. So if we want to change that, if we want to change a European narrative into something that is a little bit more wholesome, something that does respond to a growing European identity, whether you agree with it or not, it is growing, and something that we should try and work with. If you want to do that, we need to publish differently and we need to produce differently. Publishing is the moment where you say, okay, we're going to think of different sections. We're going to think of different ways to approach this audience. And through different publishing, through saying we're not going to just do national news and then the European news, we're saying we're writing this for anyone who considers themselves within the European spectrum. And by engaging in that kind of audience, we can say, okay, now this is what Europe is to you. And under the surface, in that banal way that Billig tells us about, that means that if you see that happening every single day, you will start to envision it, remember it, and structure your thought differently, which hopefully eventually might shape the narrative a bit differently. That is the theoretical, like big philosophical kind of parts. But obviously there's also the production side, and that is the side that Are We Europe tries to tackle most. So how do you produce differently? It is logical and understandable that most media are based in a local place. They might report on their local area, and then some might report on a national level. How do you start making European stories? How do you produce a story that really comes from all corners of the world? Our Europe tries to do that by setting up a big network of young European media makers, preferably young, not because we're like, okay, boomers, we hate you, but because they're like the one millennial who gets it. But because young people were born after Schengen, were born after everything that has been tried to do, and therefore are part of a generation in which Europe was something that we were trying to make, I guess. And everyone who wasn't part of that was intimately connected to that and saw that happening and felt the results of wanting to maybe study abroad but didn't, and has a personal connection to how you make it. So if you choose this group of people, young European freelancing journalists, you will allow for stories to come up that are not just those that the Guardian makes, or the BBC, or Le Monde. Then, for the next part, we tried to do that ourselves a little bit bigger. So I'll introduce that first with a video. I think that is coming up. Yes.
We're here from Europe in Moldova to create a multimedia story.
Part of the project Edges of Europe, in which we invite Moldova's most talented storytellers to create a multimedia story together. We'll be working with a photographer, a journalist, a cinematographer, a designer. Together, they will brainstorm and later on build a story within a week. We follow this according to the Google Design Sprint, and we really think that in a week, with the multidisciplinary effort of the entire team, we can make an amazing story.
Right now, democracy in Moldova is in danger. Local elections were cancelled along with people's votes. At the same time, Moldova is one of the most shrinking countries in the world. We have a huge migration problem. Even in these conditions, people are coming back home to defend their right to vote. Our story is a story of resilience. We're going to present four protagonists, four protesters, and their personal story, their ways of defending democracy in Moldova.
Yes. Yeah, okay. So our Edges of Europe story was the first project where we decided to do it differently and to produce a truly European story. So one, we asked our network of young media makers to say, what are the underreported areas in Europe that you know about because you're from these places? So where should we go? And Moldova was a very quick one. It's one of the least visited places in Europe, and not just by tourists, also by the press. And there was a protest happening. There was something that was of actual value that we needed to hear about. So we went there, and instead of just reporting about this underreported place, which obviously we were already excited to do, we decided to drum up work with the local journalists that we already knew, create a team together, completely multimedia. So, as you said, photographer, designer, all of it. And create a multimedia story together in 1 week. As our Europe, we came with a facilitating team to make sure that this new multimedia project type of idea could happen. And we did one other important thing, and that was to make sure that the angle that they were presenting in their story was interesting for a European audience. Because in the end, a European story is great if it comes from Moldova. Yes, it is super European because it comes from a local context. It's something that the rest of Europe should know about. But it isn't fully European if we don't take this European audience into account. If we don't think about what that European audience needs to know and needs to hear in order to really understand the story. So our editors were there to make sure that this story was palpable and understandable. But we didn't do any of the production. The story that we created, we didn't decide what that was going to be beforehand. We did that through workshops. We did 2 days of full workshops in which we made a storyline together. And then we produced The only production was done by the local Moldovan team. So in this way, we hope to make stories that matter, stories that really tell a European story and to a European audience. And by telling it to a European audience, we hope to create a European narrative that isn't hijacked by national media. And now I'll be a little opportunistic, because we're here full with a room of people who might, in some way or maybe not at all, identify as European. So what I'd like to ask you is please come up to me afterwards if you know of any of those underreported places that you think need to be talked about at a European level. And we would love to come see if we can come and create one of those stories with you. An upcoming one is actually going to be produced in Bosnia about school segregation. If you still want to hang on to that one, please let me know. Greenland is coming up, and Armenia is also being produced in December. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much. Not yet, no.
Right. Thank you, Maria, so much for this presentation and introduction to your work. So I would like to go back to the beginning of Are We Europe? And when we speak about the European identity, it's something that for me has actually been always a little bit abstract. Actually, there is an anecdote that maybe I can bring up that reflects a little bit this distance. I'm from Ibiza. It's an island in the Mediterranean Sea, which actually some of you might know as Ibiza or Ibiza, depends on which TV you watch most. But I grew up there. I go back there. My family is there. I arrived here, though, 7 years ago, and this has become as well my home. And so recently I ran into someone in the street, and we were speaking about traveling in between the two places, and she asked, so how do you do for the traveling, for the flights and whatnot? And I just said, well, I have to fly somewhere in Europe, and then from there, just go home or here. And she started laughing. This happened here in Pristina just a few days ago. And she started laughing because for her, I was speaking as a Kosovar who thinks of Europe as something that a Kosovar is not part of or has been shut down from it. And in my head, actually, I was speaking from the perspective of the Ibizan and flying from the island and into the mainland. Because for us, actually, for myself or for the region there, which is a Spanish island, and I have never really grown up with the European ideal. It's something that for me has been always coming from the north, if you might say. So even though we are from different countries, and I know that if I start asking for experiences here in the room, not to speak, actually Spain is in the European Union, and somehow the idea of Europe has been always very much connected, probably unfairly, to the idea of the European Union. And I should probably feel more part of it, but I'm sure if I start questioning here people from the region, from Serbia, from Kosovo, which is not even people from in Kosovo cannot even travel freely into so many of the countries in Europe.
Though it still happens, which I find so interesting.
Yes, so there is a lot of perspective about the European idea and the European identity. And I would like to ask you, when you started with Are We Europe, what was for you this concept of the European identity, and how did it evolve in the process of working on the stories and the publication that you have as well, the print?
Good question. Yeah. I think it started. So we never started with the idea of wanting to engage in this European identity. We actually started with the idea of nationalism in Europe. So we all saw whatever John was also explaining, the rise of nationalism. And then I was interested in both sides, so not just the right-wing xenophobic nationalism, but also the left-wing, somewhat more progressive Catalonian nationalism, for example. So we went to Barcelona and shot a video there, like a mini documentary. And what we found there was that everyone was waving a European flag, and that the nationalisms were still connected to wanting to become part of something bigger. In nationalism studies, which was actually my master's, one of the biggest first things that you learn is that a nation is always a nation among nations, as a part of a larger collective, and that can be the world, but that can also be Europe in some way or another, or all of the nations that are culturally connected to you or whatsoever. So I think that's where it started, and what I've noticed now is that, so then I still thought of EU, I think mostly, but that has broadened a lot for me. We just went to Armenia, which is, to most people, not even actually Europe, but they identify as European. And I think that for me was the most important thing, is when someone takes on the mantle of saying, I want to identify as European because it brings me something, that for me is enough to say, okay, you're engaging in European identity. That's, yeah.
Actually, I was thinking when looking into the idea of the European identity, and somehow I was thinking it's like Santa Claus at the same time. It's like a myth,
yeah.
Or maybe even the American dream. Does it really exist? Is it something that has been sold as something to which we have to belong because of a political,
for sure,
or a societal project?
Yeah.
But at the same time, is this? And you were mentioning before that the national media houses as well have a power as well in creating this European narrative. But this idea of the European identity, will you say that has it been somehow imposed as well by a certain number of people in a certain number of countries, possibly by a certain number of men who are also white, who are also in the West particularly? Yeah. And how does the media, in this case a media like yours, contribute to democratizing this idea of Europe?
Okay, so yes and no. Yes, it has been imposed by some, for sure. And the European Union is the worst in trying to make everything, put a European flag on everything all the time. So I do agree that there is a certain imposition and that feels very top-down. And as I said, I think the national media houses are probably even worse in that perspective than the EU, because they brand everything the EU does as EU, but we have to submit to it, right? So it is still an accepted thing that we have to submit to, and by that you create the European identity in a way, but in a very negative manner. It's something that you have, but you don't want to have. And the democratization process, I think, comes from letting go, maybe like trying to deal also with the national framework. Like the only way to like really engage with a Europe that is useful is by acknowledging that it is an international movement. And international is maybe not the right word. It is a movement of individuals in different countries. And they just happen to be in different countries, and together they are also something.
It goes beyond the state.
It does, and it should be completely independent of the states. Whereas now, the way that we deal with Europe is only through the states. So I think our efforts are to, with our media, to create something where it doesn't matter in which state you belong, you can participate in our version of European identity, something that we are discovering, without having to bring your national identity along. And participating in a discussion as you, someone who identifies as European, not you, a Spaniard, like me, a Dutch person, and therefore I am European. And that also allows, therefore, Armenians to join, and it allows for whoever is maybe not like officially part of the European project to still identify and participate.
You said something just earlier about the idea of this identity or this concept being top-down. presented or brought. When you were, and I apologize because we had a technical problem with showing your video, but I actually saw it before you presented it, and it's your idea or the way, the process of working with the Edges of Europe project, particularly in Moldova, and this multimedia project. And I would like if you could explain a little bit more about this process of involving community in the story making. There is an approach that I believe it's story sprints. Is it
story design?
Story design sprint. Okay, you will explain it. I will not get it wrong now, but that is something that you present as a solution to actually, get to know this real identity or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, for sure. So in short, we just stole it from the Google Design Sprint, which is a method from Google to quickly go from an idea to a semi-finished product, something that you can actually test and try out with. What we do is in 5 days, we start first the idea process, like how do we make ideas, and for that we invite local civil society usually to update most people on an issue. There's still not even an angle, not even a story, no idea of what we're going to do in this place. Whereas otherwise you would come with, we're going to make a story about this, this, and this, and we're going to interview these people. That's how you usually fly into a place. What we do is we just go, we choose the team, we choose the people that come speak. Sometimes you choose a theme, like a direction, so it's not too broad. And then on day one, we assemble all of the ideas of the local journalists, everything that they've been thinking about, that they've wanted to write about, that they maybe already wrote about, but they never could fully do. We create all these stories, basically just post them on whiteboards. And then we have a workshop process to go from the big idea generation to a story where everyone has had input. So we're working then with a team of 6 people, and then the facilitators. And those 6 people who produce the story will all have had something to say about what the story needs to be about. And we've all considered like the sources that they have and the input that they have. And then we start producing in the days afterwards. So as I said, we're only there to facilitate that process. So we don't bring in any ideas. And the only thing we say is, okay, I have no idea what that's about. Like, explain it to me, so that we make sure that the European angle is still there.
And I suppose this work is also produced with journalists. In general, also all the work that you do is not only with a group of journalists coming from another place in Europe, but also working together as a team with journalists in that particular region.
Yeah, so here in Moldova, we're just Moldovan journalists. We did it in Greece as well, only with Greece journalists. So in this project, we always work with just a local team, people we have found through our network. And that, bring together a couple of skills so that we can make something very quickly, which is, for us, because of money reasons, it's an important thing. So we balance everything a little bit, and in that way, we produce a story that otherwise, a small media like us would never be able to produce, because it would cost us months to produce if you would have to research it from behind your desk and then try to get everything in place to do it exactly like you wanted, the way that you thought of it before. Like, we would never be able to do that. Like, the Guardian can pay for that, but we cannot. So we just come, we facilitate, and then we make a story together. Yeah.
We'll get questions, if anyone has any questions, in a second. But I will just go ahead with following up on these. One of the things that struck me when I was seeing the longer video that you have online about this type of work, and I recommend everyone to see it to learn more about this process. One of the things that I found very interesting was that before having a final story going to publication, you actually had a gathering with, I imagine, they were residents, people you had interviewed.
I guess they were neighbors or people who knew the issue, and you had a screening of videos, a screening of you had the computers with the community showing them the story as a final/final 333 file, and you put it online for them to experience it, and you tell them, please check it. We're going to be here listening to your comments. Yes. We want to hear your feedback. This story is not final. It's a final / almost there type of a draft. And we're really interested in knowing what you think and how we can improve the story from that. Now, if I think of a very orthodox journalist, I will imagine that often people are scared, or journalists are afraid, in one hand, that if they show their story before it goes to publication, in one way their independence is being undermined, or it can be edited in ways that it's unnecessary, or it can potentially endanger the outsider perspective that you need to have to be able to hold certain people accountable. Or, of course, this story was not an investigative story, breaking news type, but still you allowed citizens who are knowledgeable of the context to give you feedback, and you are open to change the story.
Yeah.
So how do you reconciliate as journalists with this idea, and also how do you go about it in this process of accepting this kind of feedback?
Well, I think after 10 days of working in a completely different manner than the journalists are normally already used to, everyone's already a bit like, okay, whatever you do, I guess that's how we do it now. So that helps. It is definitely a process that we always have to get people along with this. And how we reconciliate the ethics about it, that is obviously in the end just a discussion that we have internally. So we do a town hall, we talk to the people, everyone can just come with their comments, but it doesn't they're not there to edit the file. You know, like it's not like they're actually changing what we're writing. I think we see it more as a fact-checking by the people who are most knowledgeable about the issue. So we've produced a story very quickly with their input, but not with a lot of editing and a lot of fact-checking ourselves. So the first people that we need to go to are them, to make sure that they feel like this is exactly the way that it feels right to them. Obviously, then behind our desk we can still do the final fact-checks and make sure that everything is the way we want it. But yeah, we don't see it as them influencing what we write, because they're already our sources. They're already the people that we talk to. So it wouldn't make any sense to suddenly feel very, very pressured by them having an influence after the editing process. But I have seen with the journalists that it is a bit of a step to kind of go oh no, that makes sense. It's fine. I can do it, and also I don't have to put in if I don't agree with it. So, yeah.
All right. Yes. Would you like to ask any questions, anyone? Yeah. We have a question there.
Good evening. My name is Leah. I'm from Germany. At first, thanks a lot for your project. It resonates a lot with me. I'm quite interested. But also, I'm wondering who the actual target group is, and if you can share some insights who you're actually reaching with your project. Is it the youth of our kind being interested in journalism and media, or is it a much bigger group that I can't estimate?
Yeah. Actually, it's for the Moldovan one, it was actually for all of them. We see, first of all, it's read by local communities a lot, which for me was very surprising, that people still really wanted to read about something that was about their own country, because it kind of felt like we're just telling you what we already know. But it just goes to show that those places are underreported. Then for all of the ones involved, there's a big diaspora that we see. Moldova mostly, but the same in Greece. Diaspora that actually, we did a little survey and we measured how often something was shared. We saw that diaspora shared it a lot with their community, their larger communities in where they were staying. So, diaspora in London, for example, would share it with their friends and family there to kind of show, like, look what's happening in my country. This is something that I'm dealing with. And then, yes, the age group for every Are We Europe project, everything is basically between 21 and 32. Like, it's not, yeah, that's the 10-year gap that we're talking about. So it is a very young millennial audience, mostly higher educated, because that diaspora is higher educated. That's the whole reason that they moved. So that is what we're talking about. Obviously, these types of projects are not the super snappy, easy journalism that is for everyone. It is for someone who wants to delve a little bit deeper. It's a long project, a long story to go through with a lot of information. So it is for a certain type of person. But yeah, does that answer your question? Okay.
We have any other question? Yes, we have a couple of them. One right there.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I just have a short story and then a question. Last year I visited the Louvre, and it was kind of like the symbol of the gatekeepers of Europe, and I'm American, but when I went to buy a ticket, they asked if I lived in Europe, and I'm sure they meant, and I had been living in Kosovo, and I'm sure they meant, are you an EU resident? And I said, yes, I live in Kosovo, and the guy, the Frenchman very politely said, no, that's not Europe. So my question is, when I talk to my friends here, they want so badly to have access to the EU and to be considered European. So do you have like opposition from other Europeans about your project and people that take on a European identity in Moldova or Armenia or Kosovo?
You mean, do they oppose to them feeling European?
Yeah.
Oh, that is not necessarily something I find. What I do see is that there's a lot of opposition from people in mostly Western European countries to tackle something European. The moment you say we're going to engage with this, they're saying you're legitimizing the EU, which I don't think we're doing, but I can see how people feel like if you engage with this idea of identity, you're legitimizing a certain politics. And with that, yes, there is a sense of why are you making this bigger than it should be. But for me, that just goes to show that there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot that we need to discuss together, and whether you're EU or not. Yeah.
I think we had another question here at the front. David.
Yeah, I left the hard questions for you because I know that John couldn't like hold any hard questions. So, I mean, the papers I work for, we cover both like super international stuff, like I don't know, Trump, Brexit, like also like more underexposed stuff, and also like very very local, on the level of like neighborhood, even like one block of flats. And to anyone that ever worked in the media won't be surprised that the latter one get much more attention, much more clicks. And I get it, like it really affects you if you're living in that block of flat or in that neighborhood or in this city. You really want to know and you really need this information. So what would you say to a person from like one block of flat or another if you were like to present them the story from Moldova and they say, but why should I care about what's going on in Moldova?
Yeah, good question. I think we really try to, first of all, outside of these projects, we try to find themes that touch upon every European on a local level. So that could be, I know, trash collection or whatever, something that is something that we could talk about at an international level because it touches upon climate change, it touches upon, all these different things, but it also has a local representation for everyone involved. When it comes to the Edges of Europe products, that's a bit different because we go only to one specific locality and talk about it, their struggle there. Why I think that is important for a European audience is because there's different struggles there that other European citizens and non-citizens, actually especially non-citizens, deal with, which is, for example, the pressure of Russia. It is a brain drain when the moment, the rest of Europe gets more attractive. So when people start to move, what happens to the country when only the old people stay behind? There's loads of themes that are in this story specifically that are interesting for everyone involved. And what we try to do is when we're talking about, for example, the brain drain was a very big part of this story. We try to make it something that everyone who comes from a country that understands can engage with. But in our follow-up communication, we do a lot to make the people in Western European countries understand this is what's happening with all these people that are coming to your country. It's not just that they are coming to your country, it's also that their countries are emptying out. And you can not just look at this one part of the story if you're not looking at the other. So for us there, we try to find a hook or an angle for them to say, like, you are also part of this story because you are employing these people illegally somewhere, or you are whatever. You know, those stories happen on the other side of the brain drain. Actually, not the brain drain, but yeah, of the migrations. Yeah.
Just to wrap it up and to finish with a very, very short question, and we have to move on to our next presentation. We're running a little bit out of time. But very, very shortly, if you could tell us, you made a call here to our colleagues in the room, potentially for Edges of Europe project, if they have any proposals. I want to ask you something. Edges of Europe, is it something that is established only by the territory at the outside of the continent borders, or is it something that we can find as well, those edges, those scenarios of,
perfect question. Yes,
of the edge.
We're actually gonna
at the very center of.
Yeah, we're actually gonna do one in Maastricht, which is arguably the corner, the heart of the European Union. And we're actually gonna do one there, where we're focusing on people who are in Maastricht but cannot fully live their citizenship. So that is, definitely something that would be really interesting, as long as there's that kind of do I belong or not question, then it's something that we want to talk about. Yeah.
Well, thank you,
Thank you.
Martens. Looking forward to that.
Yes.
And, thank you for sharing. In the meantime, I will ask Berta Tilman-Taite. I hope I'm pronouncing it as well as I can. Berta is coming from Lithuania, from the collective, the media collective Nanook, which is a platform of multimedia documentaries as well as other types of multimedia journalism. But also in her work as a visual multimedia journalist, she's also worked a lot on videography as well as photography. And she's going to be speaking to us about some of the stories that they have been able to produce, and also the very different things that multimedia journalism can bring. Not only in the creative or the technical or innovative angle, but also aspects at the very core of journalism. So I will not take as well much time to introduce you. I'll let your work and your presentation speak for it. So thank you, and we'll have time as well to have more questions from you. Thank you, Berta.
How are you all doing? It's been a long day. Not easy to talk about John and Maria. Thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure. We can start. Yeah, some people leaving. So we created Nanook for almost 5 years ago with my colleague. It was just two of us in the beginning. And we were not happy with the landscape of journalism in Lithuania. We didn't have space where we wanted to work the way we wanted to work and tell the stories we want to tell in a way we wanted to tell. So we decided that we have to we just met and just naturally started to talk about what should we do and how should we create the space. And so we started brainstorming, and that's how we created Nanook, and then started to work on our first project. But from the very beginning, it was clear that our main goals are in-depth content that meets the highest standards of quality and ethics. Both of us, we were working as freelancers before, and we were working with foreign media that had way higher standards of ethics and quality than the media in Lithuania. And so we wanted to keep on working according to those standards. And then another thing that was also important for us was the engagement with the audience, like face-to-face engagement. And not less important was the education, various lectures and workshops that we continue working on. And that is really a big part of our work that is unseen, but is present. So we started with big documentary, multimedia documentary projects in the beginning. We wanted to touch the questions, the issues that are very complex, very complicated, and so it requires the complex way to represent them, because sometimes text is not enough to tell the story, or video is not enough to tell the story, so you have to combine different mediums. And since my colleague was interested in these complicated topics, and I was interested in how to present them, so we worked together. And then 2 years ago, we also launched our first professional journalistic podcast in Lithuania, and I will talk about that a bit later as well. But shortly, to understand how we work and the topics we do is a first project that we did that is called Monotone Days. It's about women in the correctional facility in Lithuania. Sorry for those who've been in the workshop and heard a little bit. It was supposed to be the way around. So I will be repeating myself a bit for those who were not in the workshop. We were not happy with when we started to work, and when we were looking for the topic for our first project, we were thinking, like, we did a long list what we were not happy with about in Lithuanian media, and one of those topics were the women, sentenced women, because the usual narrative in Lithuanian media where those women, in that narrative, those women were stigmatized, blamed, shunned. And so we went to this correctional facility to not only listen, but to really hear personal stories without any preconceived notions, to find another angle to talk about the issue. And the English version of it was published in Al Jazeera, and for us it's really important from the very beginning that the topics that we work on in our country would catch the attention of international audiences. So we have to find a way to talk about those topics in a way that would be interesting for international audiences. And with those stories, with journalism in general, it's really hard to measure the impact that journalism does, especially in the fields of discrimination and equality and so on. But from the feedback we've got, and for us it's really important to talk to the audience, to get the feedback, to know what they felt or what they thought while watching the project. So from the feedback we've gotten, from the comments we've got, it's safe to say that our project flipped a few stereotypes and made the audience question the usual narrative and think about often unseen sides of the stories that are presented in the mainstream media. And for example, the staff in the correctional facility, while we were working on the project, it took us 9 months to go back and forth, to talk, to spend time there, and then to edit the material and so on. Of course, we were doing other things during those 9 months as well. But when we were working, the staff at the correctional facility told us that it's been 10 years that they were trying to finish the already financed project to move women who live in the correctional facility with their children up to 3 years to a house in the city, in the town where the correctional facility is, so that the woman would have a chance to easier integrate into society, go to work, but live into with guards in the house. But the community of the town was extremely opposed to this kind of project. They didn't want to live next to criminals. They thought they were dangerous. But then after a few months, when this project was released, those women were actually moved to such house. And when we were talking with the staff, they were saying that, well, probably this documentary helped the community to see those women as not just faceless criminals, but as actual citizens of the society, members of the society. So they were easier accepted. After another year, in 2016, we did another documentary project about Lithuanian Paralympians. And again, we were not satisfied that the Olympics and Olympians were celebrated in Lithuanian media with a lot of bombastic. Meanwhile, Paralympians were staying on the fringe of Lithuanian media and were lucky to get a mention in the news sports segment. So we wanted to recreate the narrative of Olympics in Lithuania altogether. And so we set out for a 2-month hardcore journey to document the preparation for the Paralympic Games of all 13 members of National Paralympic Team. And with this project as well, we were working without any budget whatsoever. I was working with 3 of my students and low budget, low key, really basic way of working. But we managed to pull it off somehow, even if we felt it was bigger than us, but we pulled it off, and we got an attention of international audience and got a few international awards, and we were competing against the New York Times and the Guardian, which for us was a big award already, but then when we won it was even bigger. But what is more important, that the actual change started to take place, and Paralympians were met at the airport just like Olympians for the first time in their career. Some of the Paralympians were participating in the 5th Games already, so it's 20 years that they've been doing this. And after the project was published and other journalists pick up this story, and other TVs and radios were started to talk about it. So after they came back, they were met at the airport for the first time. For them, it was a shock, because 20 years, nothing happened, and suddenly there's people meeting them and people talking about them, and then the discriminative laws as well were being changed because the laws for disabled sportsmen were not really equal to those of sportsmen in general. And in 2017, we did the biggest project so far that we've ever done. It was called Traces, Traversing the Past. And with this project, we wanted to create a new narrative for a younger generation about the deportations of the Soviets, who deported lots of Lithuanians to Siberia. And we wanted to create this new narrative without anguish and accusation, but focusing on life, experience, and survival, because that's how we believe, that's what about the deportations and survival and the people who survived we're telling about. So yeah, the goal was to connect the expedition of 4 men who went to the furthest most point of the deportations in Siberia, to the Laptevian Sea, and they did a crossing of almost 600 kilometers unsupported, just on their own, on foot and with inflatable boats. So we wanted to connect their experience of surviving the harsh surroundings, the harsh Siberian nature, with the history of deportations. And one of the guys that was actually the head of the expedition, his grandfather was deported to that part, and his father was born there. So for him, as he said, when his daughter was born, he wanted to actually be able to tell this story not only from the books, because his grandfather wrote the book as well, but he wanted to experience it and to at least understand a bit how was the life there and how his father and grandfather were living there. So this whole project, we ended up with tons of material, a lot of archival footage, the footage that we shot ourselves, photos and videos, texts, interviews with the former exilees that survived and came back to Lithuania. And so we had to find the ways and look for ways to present all of that material to the audience. And what we did, it was not only to look like ways to present this new narrative, but also to publish it in a way that would be the most convenient for the audience to explore. So what we did was we created a 4-part web documentary series that you can go and watch online. So it's 4 episodes telling about the historical context, preparation for the expedition itself, and then expedition and coming back, and revelations of the members of the expedition. But that, of course, wasn't enough. There was a lot more left outside of the series, of the episodes. So what we did, those series, we enriched those series with texts that provided more context, more information, more details about the exilees who survived there, and about the expedition itself, about the historical context. We also did a map, an interactive map, where we put every time that the expedition sent us the message from their GPS device, we put the message on the map in the exact location where the message was sent from, to know that, so that the audience would know where the expedition is now and what they are experiencing at the exact moment. And after that, the whole map can be explored, and the route of the expedition can be seen, and what they experienced throughout the expedition. And another thing that we did was an interactive kind of interview. The exilee who survived the harsh Nordic weather in Siberia, he was telling us a lot of stories, and he provided a lot of information. We had 8 hours of interview, and there were a lot of interesting bits and pieces that we didn't know how to use. It didn't fit in the web series, and it was too much in the text as well. So we were thinking how to present it, and so one of our team members, he's a gamer, and he said, guys, there's when in some of the games, there's a possibility to kind of talk with the character. You can choose a topic or a question, and you can talk with the character. So maybe we can do the same. So this is what we did. We did an interactive conversation with Vitalis, the survived exilee. Then you can choose the topic that you want him to talk about, and he's covering that topic. So we are constantly looking at what is transpiring in the field of journalism and technology, what new tools can be used to tell stories, but of course, it's the story itself is always the most important, and technology would be useless in journalism without actual human, personal, real stories. So we have to not forget that and not to focus only on technology. As I said, 2 years ago, we launched the first professional journalistic podcast in Lithuania. Journalist Karolis, who is a host and producer of the podcast, joined our team with the idea that he wanted to create a podcast because he liked podcasts and there were no podcasts in Lithuania. So he wanted to create one. And of course, we were happy to welcome him in our team and to help him to do that. So it's not only the podcast itself, the sound, but we provide photographs, we do videos, and we also try to do the podcast thing as an experience, as another little mini multimedia project for the audience. And it's also, for me, it was really nice and experience to see that you can actually just focus on the story itself and do it in a very basic way, just using sound and just focusing on the story and on the conversation with a person. And it was an interesting revelation because before we were like really heavy visual focused and working with the visuals all the time. And so now when we started to work with sound and when visuals became like a secondary part, it was interesting to see how the approach to the story changes. So every week, the podcast is weekly. So every week we talk with people who, in our opinion, shape our modern world. We do it in Lithuanian, we have episodes in English, and we also started to do Russian episodes for the Russian-speaking audience in Lithuania. We do feature episodes on various topics that we think are important to discuss, that are underreported in Lithuania. Like, for example, here we talked with the youth of Roma minority in Lithuania. We also discuss media amongst ourselves and with colleague journalists from other media outlets. And we started to organize Nyla live events where the audience gets involved and can take a part in the recording. And it's an example of relational journalism where us as journalists are not like just reporters, but we become facilitators of the conversation. And we not talk to the audience, but we talk with the audience. And then in this way, the whole work process changes a bit because we are held way more accountable when meeting the audience and not hiding behind the screen. And the audience can really provide a lot of information that we wouldn't get otherwise. A lot of the interviewees that we had in the podcast, for example, their names and contacts came from the audience because we wouldn't know about some woman scientist from Lithuania working in NASA because no one talked about her, but she had a friend who was listening to our podcast, so she told us that. So there's this woman that maybe you would be interesting to talk with. And there was another scientist who was working with Ebola and from Lithuania that also we never heard of, but because of his friends, we found out about him. So it's really important for us to keep the connection with the audience, to hear what they think, to meet them, and to hear their opinions and to argue sometimes with them. Another thing what we did when we launched the podcast was the Patreon. And instead of relying on commercial financing from like ads and stuff, we decided to talk to the audience and say, so maybe if you like our content, you would be willing to pay. And a lot of people are willing to pay, even if all of our content is free. We have no paywalls, because we believe that what we do has to be freely accessible for everyone, even if you cannot pay. But if you like our content, you can choose to pay and like help us go forward. We also partner with commercial partners who sponsor or donate to help us out, but we always retain the rights of the content. Like no one can tell us how to do it and what to do or what to say or what not to say. It's the final. We can just let them choose which episodes they want to sponsor, or but they also hear the content and the episodes at the same time as the audience. So if they don't like it, there's no way back. What we did as well to have more connection with the audience was the interactive exhibition of the podcast. So we created these light boxed photos from the podcast, and we put headphones so that you could come to the photo and listen for a short piece from the interview that was done for the podcast with the person that is in the picture. And we did the exhibition in the National Library in Lithuania. And we did meetings with the audience, like guided tours, answered questions. And we also send postcards with our photos to the patrons. We have Facebook group where we share, where we discuss with the audience, answer their questions and get their feedback as well. So it's really important, and we want to keep engaging with the audience as much as possible, because we feel like today in the media industry, people are often reduced to numbers and clicks, and so how many clicks you get, that's it. You don't know the actual people that you are supposed to serve. You don't know their needs. You just count the clicks, and in our opinion, that's not the way how it should work. And so education is often unseen part of our work, but it's very, very important part of our work. We do various lectures and workshops. We partner with different organizations who hire us to do that, or finance the projects that we want to do with schools or universities or teachers of the schools. So we travel to meet teachers, to meet their students, or they travel to where we are to have workshops and to learn the skills, how to use different equipment to produce stories that they care about the most themselves. Yes, so we believe that well-told stories and can expose audience to the issues in a different way, and when you use technology, it invites the audience to see and explore the story from yet unfamiliar angle, and maybe to discover something that is a bit unexpected. It's really important to sometimes forget all the technology innovation and step out of the digital world and meet the actual people that you're serving, that you work for. And education, I think it really has to be a part of journalists' work, because media literacy education, and especially now with all the fake news, deep fakes, manipulations and everything, because only universally literate community is open for discussion, for unity, instead of being polarized. So yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you. Thank you, Berta. Thank you for this wonderful presentation of your work, and also we had the chance, and part of the people who came to Pristina for our Media Now conference as well had the chance to take part in a workshop today. Not in a workshop, but it was more of a conversation with you and learning more about the insights behind the stories. And that was very, very fruitful and very interesting. I think it is very inspiring to see that there is people producing still very insightful journalism, and in a way that it's also very creative at the same time, definitely. I would like, in general, when I look back, I think of this Polish writer and journalist as well, Ryszard Kapuscinski, who was a very famous, perhaps some of you know it. Sure, our colleague David should. But he did speak that besides the 5 senses, there is a 6th sense that journalists should have, which is understanding the smells, the colors, the things that are not really tangible. And I feel like multimedia can bring that dimension to the people that allows you to immerse yourself. But from your perspective, what can multimedia journalism do better than other types of more classic forms?
I wouldn't want to, compare, and I wouldn't want those different forms to compete and say what's better, what's worse. I really believe that every story has ways to tell it, and it can be told in one way or another. And like we as journalists, especially if we work with different mediums, we have to think which medium will tell the story the best and will reveal it at its best. So this is, I think, the most important thing. If it's just good in a very traditional form of journalism, it's fine. You don't have to do it in a way of multimedia. But what it can do, and what I believe, like why I chose this way to work with for a while, was because I think it gives you a possibility to work on really difficult issues and make it kind of easier for the audience to approach them, because it's not a long text or a book or something, but it's different mediums because different people have different preferences. Some people like to read, some people like to watch videos, and some people just listen. And so with multimedia, you can attract all those different kinds of people and invite them to explore the story and explore the topic and issue. And like, it's really now, with the age of all the visuals, all the social media, people are really attacked with all the information and videos and visuals and everything. So you have to be creative and also respectful of their time. If they're going to spend time with your project, you have to really like guide them through and show what is important, what are the most important parts of the story, but also provide some details to bring those people into those places and help them to see some smells and feelings and atmosphere and personal, qualities of the people that are in the story. So yeah, I think it just can provide more complex way, but it's not always that it should be applied.
Today, in this hour where we had a bit of time to learn more about the insights behind the stories, there was something that I found very interesting, because we rarely think of when we speak about multimedia journalism. In general, I think that people have this image of it as something that you just go, record, get out of it, cut, put some text in there, some pictures. But actually what you spoke about today and the stories that you also presented, monotone days particularly, perhaps we can speak about this one, which was about a correction facility where women are living and detained. But it was about their lives and how they experienced living in such a space. And what I kept hearing from you was also the ethical element behind your approach in general. How can this kind of journalism or multimedia journalism, because of what it entails, going to the place and spending time, how can this type of multimedia journalism uphold these ethical responsibilities or improve them?
Yes, it's really, like for me, I realize that it's harder and harder to work, because I question like that. Now it's like even I don't know, maybe I'm getting older or something, but I really start to think every time I take a photo, is it really necessary? Every time I start to talk to people about the story, is it really necessary? It's really hard for me to go to work, for example, I don't know, in Ecuador, I was working after the earthquake. How do I approach people? Why do I do this and how do I do that? With personal stories as well, like the correctional facility, it's such a sensitive topic. And for example, some of those women, like there's one woman, she asked us not to use her name. But we said, do you understand that your face is going to be there? So people who know you, they still know you. And she's like, yes, it's fine. I just don't want my name to be used. So we felt the responsibility to explain her this, and she told the story, and it's in the project, that actually some of her friends and people that she knew think that she's in San Francisco, living in California, because she didn't want them to tell them that she's in the correctional facility. So she told them that she's living in California. But then she told us that. And we said, do you understand that it's going to be published? And then we realized that maybe for her it was an easier way to reveal, because maybe she realized that she would have to do it anyway. But now she wouldn't have to do it on her own. People would just see it if they see it, if not, not. But like, it was a way for her to take it out. So yes, it's really important to be sensitive while working. It's really important to tell the people, I always tell, you can stop me anytime if you feel uncomfortable, me filming or me asking something, because I want to ask difficult questions as well. But if I ask, can you feel uncomfortable, you can stop me. Then I will ask why you don't want to talk about it and explain why I think it's important to talk about it. But I want them to know that they might stop me anytime. And then we might continue and go into those questions, but just to have the understanding that I'm not, even if I'm asking uncomfortable questions, I don't want any harm, but I think that it's important to talk about it. So this first, even like when you start, that I think you have to show them that they are a part of creative process, the people that you work, that you film, that they can stop you and say if they feel uncomfortable with you, or if they feel that you're doing something wrong and, for example, asking stupid questions instead of asking something that is really important. So I also ask that, like, do you feel that there's something that we didn't discuss that we should discuss because maybe I'm ignorant and don't understand something.
You particularly mentioned today that because of the experiences a lot of people had with a regular journalist or daily media that will go just get the story in half an hour, get a short interview, they lost a lot of trust in journalists, and therefore it was perhaps more difficult for them to trust you. And after they saw you were coming back, after 3 days and 4 days, and you into some of these stories you went for 9 months, actually, many times without camera, without any sort of recording.
Yeah, I think that like when you choose the story, especially when you choose a story for a multimedia project, you have to ask yourself if you're ready to work with this story for a long time, in hard conditions, going back and forth, and in the situations where things might not work. So you have to be ready that people will not let you in, that people, they're not going to trust you. So first what you have to do is to gain their trust, then not to lose it, and then go back for as many times as you need to finish the story. And you have to be ready that the story might not be finished at all if you see that things are not working out, if there's something that is not going the way it should go. So you just have to be ready for everything.
We're a little bit tight with time, but if there is any question, I see somebody raising the hand there. Yeah, we'll get a mic to Alexander from Macedonia.
Hi, thank you. My name is Alexander Manasiev, journalist from Vidivac from Macedonia. I really like your project. I really like what I saw, especially because I missed the presentation today, because I was on the other one, and I asked whether it's videoed or not, and I was happy to see it here. I have two questions, one easy and one maybe more difficult. The first one is, does the name represent something? I've seen the Nanook in Greece, and it means something completely different, possibly in your language. And the second one is, you mentioned something, you tackled something about the ethics. I had one problem with one of the stories, to be honest. Visually, I mean. I was a journalist for 16 years, and 10 of those years I've covered many topics about crime and corruption, and I've done many stories in prison. And these are stories very difficult to tell to people, and especially visually. I was working in print media, and for me it was easy at that time to face those ethical dilemmas. But women in prison and children showing with their faces, as not just as a journalist, but as a father of a small kid, probably the same age as those kids were, I really want to publish them without their faces covered. My question was, did you have this ethical dilemma? Did you talk with the inside of the publication, or did you talk with your colleagues whether to publish them? And if you talked, what was the reason why you decided to show their faces? And to conclude, I really like your project. I really like the really important stories. Don't think of this as a critic, but just as an ethical dilemma.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's really important to talk, and we, going back to this question ourselves, it's really like at that time when we did it, it was, for us, it was really important to show, and we asked the mothers for permission and everything to show it, because we felt that the whole issue was underrepresented. For example, there was a TV show, the talk show, where there was one of the women with a mask, and other participants of the show were telling to her, oh, so you only gave birth to the child so that you have easier living conditions in the prison, because they were saying that women, when they knew that they're going to be sentenced and go to prison, they would get pregnant so that they would have better living conditions with their children. So there were discussions like about this and that, and what women do and what women don't do. And why we chose to show the faces of the women and of the kids was to really show real people and real children. Now we go back in the team and the discussion about this, and we start to think that maybe we should remove the project at all, or maybe we should edit and cover the faces, because we also feel, is it right? Is it not right? At that moment, for us, it was really important to show real people, real kids, real mothers, without covering anything, because we felt there was too much talking behind masks, behind weird questions and formulations without seeing actual people. So that was the most important. Maybe it doesn't justify, maybe it still looks unethical, and maybe we should rethink and rediscuss. And I think we're going to do when I go back, because it re-emerges, and it's important to think if maybe at that time it was we published it in 2015, maybe it's not important anymore. And the name. The first documentary that was created almost 100 years ago was called Nanook of the North. And when we started to do this, we thought that, again, the documentary was did with, there were some ethical issues as well when they were shooting it and so on. So we thought it's our way to respect the character, the main character in the film. So we used the name of the two characters, Nanook, and Naila was also in the film because of that.
Do we have any other question? We have one here from Mariah.
Thanks. You're obviously a great multimedia project, and what I'm most surprised about is how well you balance the different media that you work with, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges for everyone involved. Do you have a process to choose what is represented in which type of media, in which story, and how do you do it?
Yeah, always. We always think. When we start a project, we have an idea what we want to do and how we want to do it. We have an idea, for example, Paralympian team or with the Siberian team, that the video is going to be maybe like something that we want to work on the most. But then it's really important to be flexible with multimedia projects. You can't decide before you get the material. You only decide when you have pretty much the most of the material, and then you go through it and you start to think how you're going to represent it. So, for example, in the deportation story, we thought, okay, in the web series, we're going to introduce a bit of historical context with the quotes of the exilee who survived, and then the preparation of the expedition members and why they did it, and then we will tell mostly about the expedition in the web series, and then we talk more about the historical context in the text because we had the archival material, photographs, so we could provide more information in that context because it works better in the text rather than, because it has to be like facts had to be checked, because not everything that was said in the interviews were exact, we had to correct, so then the text works better. And then, yeah, the map, we came up with the idea of a map because the guys could send us the messages, and so, yeah, we discuss, and then the way we do it, we try not to repeat the information in different mediums, because sometimes in some media outlets, multimedia projects are called the projects when they do the same information in the text, the same in the video, and the same in like audio piece, and the photographs are taken like snapshots from the video, so it repeats itself, so that the people could just choose the medium they want to consume and then just do that. But for us, we want every part of the story and every media to supplement each other. And if you explore the whole project, you will have the whole experience. If you don't, you will be missing something, but you will still understand the essence of it. So it's like to balance. If we use the quote in the video, maybe we're not going to use it in the text, but maybe we're going to use it if it's really, really important, but try not to, not to repeat the whole video in the text, or the whole text in the video, to have, like, to always surprise the audience when they go from one part to another one.
I must say we have to have the very last question now, because we have to wrap it.
So you were talking about the selection of the stories, and I just wanted to propose maybe something. So it's a chance, it's a possibility that we qualify for Euro 2020 as a nation, but we still cannot travel without visas. How is this for a story?
I think it would be interesting if, like for me, for example, it would be interesting if I could work with people from here, what Maria was talking, like to collaborate with people who work here and live here and who could help me to understand the issue from your perspective, but I could bring another angle, like, also ask questions that maybe you didn't think of because you think you know the topic and but I might have another question as an outsider that you didn't think of. So like these kind of stories, if I go and work abroad, for me it's really important to connect with people who work there to understand better this. And it could be a collaboration. We were talking before with Kosovo 2.0, I can give you my photos, you can give me,
Berta.
That was, I think, one more question, or no?
No, this had to be really the last one, but thank you very much, Berta. It's been inspiring. I think from listening to your talk earlier in the day and also listening to your talk now, there is one thing, as well as from the other talks that we had tonight, but there is one thing that comes on the table very much, and I hope it's inspiring for everyone. It's this real commitment and passion to tell these stories. And I hope that is a very good and positive closing note for people to take this message when you see the work that you were telling today about taking a shower in a petrol station so you can go with this person whom you're doing a story about and just simply spending months and months coming back to the place. I mean, that shows dedication and real respect for the people about whom and with whom we're telling stories. So thank you very much, Berta. We're going to have you tonight later as well. We can keep on bombarding you with questions as well as the other speakers and so between us all. Just a little note for everybody. We're going to have to leave Armata pretty much immediately. In 5 minutes, we will leave from the entrance. Our colleagues, Valentina, Jack, me, and Besa, who was also the moderator this morning, you will recognize them at the entrance, and we will all leave together walking to the next venue, which is very nearby. Thank you, everyone, and see you.